Dear students, welcome to 12th class Biobotany. So we were discussing about pollinating agents. Pollinating agents which helps in pollination, and there are two types of pollinating agents, biotic agents and abiotic agents. Abiotic agents, example wind and water. Pollination by the help of wind, which is called anemophily. Pollination by the help of water, which is called hydrophily. And pollination by the help of animals, which is called zoophily. So these animals may be different birds or insects, etc. So pollination by the help of birds, which is called ornithophily. Okay, so we have been discussing about biotic agents, and today we are going to discuss about another type of biotic agents like bats, insects, etc. So first of all, chiropterophily. So what is mean by chiropterophily? Which means pollination by bats, which is called chiropterophily. Okay, so what is chiropterophily? Pollination by the help of bats. Examples: the plants which show chiropterophily. Examples: Adamsonia digitata and Kigelia africana. Kigelia africana and Adamsonia digitata. So chiropterophily, which means pollination by the help of bats. Then pollination by the help of snail or slug. Snails or slugs, which is called malacophily. Malacophily. Okay, so you know what is the difference between snail and slug? Snail, they have shell, and slug, they do not have shell. Okay, so pollination by the help of snail and slug, which is called malacophily. And malacophily type pollination present in some plants of Araceae, and also water snail, which helps in pollination in lamina plant. So these are the examples for malacophily. And another type, the important pollinating agent, which is insect. Okay, so pollination by the help of insects, which is called entomophily. So that is very important. Entomophily, which means pollination by the help of insects. So different types of insects, you know, butterflies and bees, beetles, wasps, ants, moths, etc. Different types of insects, they help in pollination. So ants, they also help in pollination. Pollination by the help of ants, which is called myrmecophily, which means pollination by ants. Okay, so insects, butterflies, and honeybees, and also wasps, they are also helping pollination. So honeybees are very important as a pollinating agents. So next we are going to study about what are the characteristic features of entomophily, and what are the characteristic features of Entomophilous flowers. Okay, insects are the major pollinating agents in angiosperm, and angiosperms are adapted for insect pollination. So now we are going to discuss about what are the characteristic features of Entomophilous flowers. Okay, so you know what is entomophily. Entomophily means pollination by the help of insects. So let's discuss. First of all, the flowers of the Entomophilous flowers are large, and if they are small, they aggregate to form inflorescence. Okay, so generally the flowers are large. If they are small, they aggregate to form inflorescence. For example, sunflower, you know, sunflower, it is actually inflorescence. Okay, so that is example for here. So Asteraceae members, their flowers are small, they aggregate to form inflorescence to attract the insects. Then flowers are brightly colored. That is a major point here. All the entomophilous flowers are brightly colored to attract the insects. Okay, then flowers are scented and produce nectar, and flowers have good smell and they produce nectar, and this nectar it actually like a reward for insects. That means they use nectar as food. So flowers produce nectar and flowers are scented. That means they have smell. If flowers are not producing nectar, insects, these pollinating agents, they take pollen as food material, and especially honeybees, they take pollen as food material and also take pollen for building up their hives. Okay, that is another characteristic feature of Entomophilous flower. And the flowers are pollinated by flies and beetles. They produce foul smell to attract these pollinators. That is another characteristic feature. And in some Entomophilous flowers, juicy cells are present, and these juicy cells contain contents, and the insects which take the contents from these juicy cells as their food. So these are the important features of Entomophilous flowers. What are those? Entomophilous flowers are large. If they are small, they aggregate to form inflorescence like Asteraceae members. And flowers are brightly colored to attract the insects, and they are scented, and they produce nectar. And if there is no nectar, pollen, which is used as food material and also used for making beehives. Okay, and in some flowers which have foul smell to attract these flies and beetles. So these are the main characteristic features of Entomophilous flowers. Okay. We have discussed about entomophily. So already I told you the pollination by the help of ants, which is called myrmecophily. The pollination by the help of beetles, which is called canthrophily. Canthrophily. Okay. So these terms are very important. Canthrophily, which means pollination by beetles, and phalinophily, the pollination by the help of moths, and melitophily, pollination by bees, and psychophily, pollination by butterflies, and ornithophily, pollination by birds, and also malacophily, pollination by the help of snail. So these are different terms for different pollinations by different pollinating agents. Okay, so next we are going to study about pollination mechanism in a flower, salvia. Pollination in salvia flower, that is known as liver mechanism. So what it means? So first of all, you should know about salvia flower. Salvia flower which is adapted for bee pollination. Okay. So what are the important features of salvia flower? Salvia flower which is bilabiate, which has an upper lip and lower lip, and salvia flower which is protandrous, which means the anther is this flower which mature first with two stamens. Salvia flower, they have two stamens, and each anther of these stamens has two lobes, fertile lobe and sterile lobe. Fertile lobe, upper fertile lobe and lower sterile lobe. Okay, so fertile lobe has pollen grains, sterile lobe nothing. Then what is next? How this liver mechanism works in salvia flower. So let's see. So this flower, salvia, the bee which enter into this salvia flower and which sit on the lower lip of the salvia flower. Okay, and they get nectar from this flower. While getting nectar, they push or they strike on the sterile end of this anther. Okay, so here there is one anther lobe, and this is sterile anther lobe and this is fertile anther lobe, and these two anther lobes are connected by connective. So bee, they sit on the lower lip and they get nectar. What happens here? They strike or they push on the sterile end of the connective, and which result in descending of this fertile anther lobe, and this fertile anther lobe which result in descending of the fertile envelope. This fertile envelope strike on the back of this bee. Okay, so fertile envelopes, from these fertile envelopes the pollen grains are released and they are now on the back side of or back of the bee. So what it happens, once again bee which come into the flower for getting nectar, and they sit on the lower lip of the flower. While taking nectar, what happens? They push or they strike on the sterile end of the connective. Okay, then what happens? Which is resulting descending of fertile envelope, and this fertile envelope strike on the back of the bee. Okay, so the pollens from fertile envelope now at the back side of bee, and this bee which go to another flower, and in that flower stigma matured already and they enter into that flower. What happens here? The pollen grains on the back side of the bee which is attaches on the stigma of the flower. So pollination takes place. So this mechanism is known as lever mechanism. If there is no bee, it is not possible in salvia flower. Okay, so salvia flower which is adapted for bee pollination, and it is a protandrous flower. First anther mature, then later stigma mature. So here self-pollination is not possible. Only cross-pollination is possible because it is protandrous flower. So bee come into the flower and which push on the lower sterile lobe of the anther, which resulting in the descending of the upper fertile lobe. This upper fertile lobe strike on the back of the bee, and pollen grains now at the back side of bee, and this bee go to another flower. When they enter into this flower, the pollen grains which attaches on the stigma and the pollination takes place. Okay, so this is lever mechanism. So we have studied about self-pollination and cross-pollination. You know what is self-pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of same flower, which is called self-pollination or autogamy. So what are the advantages of self-pollination and what are the disadvantages of self-pollination? So first of all, self-pollination which is sure in bisexual flowers, because anther and stigma which are present in same flower, female part and male part present in same flower, that flower is called bisexual flower. So it is very sure in the case of bisexual flower, self-pollination is present in bisexual flower. Otherwise they need some mechanism to overcome this self-pollination. Okay, then second advantage, that if the plants are at the long distance, okay, and the species or the members of plants are uncommon, so to take pollination, plant depend on the self-pollination. If two plants have the long distance, cross-pollination is not possible. So plant depend on the self-pollination. Then if cross-pollination is not at all possible, what happens? Next generation is not going to happen. So plants depend self-pollination to prevent the extinction. Okay, so if there is no cross-pollination, what happens? Self-pollination takes place in plants to what purpose? For what purpose? To prevent the extinction of the species. So these are the advantages of self-pollination. Self-pollination is certain in the case of bisexual flower. Self-pollination is if the flowers are the long distance, self-pollination is only possible, and the plants self-pollination which prevent the extinction of the species. Okay, then what are the disadvantages of self-pollination? Continuous self-pollination. So self-pollination, then next generation also self-pollination, again next generation self-pollination. So this kind of continuous self-pollination in plants which lead to production of weaker progeny. Okay, so new characters are not acquired here, the progeny become weaker. Then second disadvantage of self-pollination, chances of producing new varieties or new species are meager, which means chances of producing new varieties or new species are very less because the same plant genes are shared here. So new varieties are not forming here because if it is from another plant, by cross pollination, those plants they have the desirable qualities, they have the genes for desirable qualities. If cross pollination takes place, it will lead to formation of new variety. But in the same plant, if it is self pollination takes place, it will not lead to formation of new variety or new species. So these are the two advantages, disadvantages of self pollination. Continuous self pollination, which lead to weaker progeny, and self pollination also lead to less number of new varieties or new species. Then what are the advantages and disadvantages of cross pollination? So first of all, advantages of cross pollination. So cross pollination, you already know, the pollen grains which are transferred from one flower to another flower of another plant. Okay, so advantages of cross pollination. Cross pollination which result in healthier offsprings or healthier progenies. Okay, that is the first advantage of cross pollination. Then germination capacity is better compared to the plants produced by self pollination. So cross pollinated plants progenies, they have their germination capacity is better. Okay, the new varieties, we can produce new varieties by cross pollination. We can compare to uh, but in the case of self pollination, we can produce less number of new varieties. Okay, but here by cross pollination we can produce more number of new varieties, and the adaptability of the plants to environment, it is much better in the case of cross pollinated plants. Okay, so these are the advantages of cross pollination. And what are the disadvantages, you already know, because if there is no cross pollinating agents, cross pollination is not going to happen. In the case of self pollination, then do not need any agents. In the cross pollination, pollinating agents are very important. If pollinating agents are not there, cross pollination is not possible. Then another one, cross pollination. Cross pollination, which is various devices should present in plants to attract the pollinating agents, or various mechanism or adaptations should present in cross pollinated plants to attract these pollinating agents, then only cross pollination possible. So these are the two disadvantages of cross pollination. Pollinating agents are very important. If there is no pollinating agents, cross pollination not possible. And devices are important for cross pollination. If there is no mechanism or adaptation or devices of cross pollination in plants, it is not possible. Cross pollination is not possible. What are the significance of pollination? We already discussed pollination. It is very important for fertilization. So fertilization means fusion of male and female gamete. That means pollen grains which bear male gamete, and inside the ovule, inside the ovary, female gamete present. So this fusion of male and female gamete should take place. Then only seed formation and fruit formation takes place. Okay, so pollination, it is very important for the formation of seed and fruits. And pollination which provide food for pollinating agents, bees and other animals. That is another important significance of pollination. And by cross pollination we can produce new varieties, and which lead to formation of new species, and also give more adaptability for the plants in the new environment. Okay, so these are the significance of pollination.